Okay, you're most welcome to Deepenomics Academy, where we make economics simple and practical. Today, we'll be talking about under the theory of demand. We'll be discussing a movement along demand curve and also a shift in demand curve, right? But before we proceed, you can always follow us on YouTube at Deepenomics Academy. And if this lesson is interesting and impactful, you can always subscribe, comment on our page, and we are always there to answer you. Okay, subscribe in our page so that you can follow our other topics because we have treated a lot of topic on demand. But today we'll be talking about a movement along demand curve and a shift in demand. My name is Eustace Chigode Uswago, and I will be your economics tutor for this lesson. Now, what do you understand by a movement along demand curve? Now, there are always two curves that shows a movement along demand curve and a shift in demand, and the both of them are different, right? Now, a movement along demand curve is caused by price alone, a change in price alone. Every other factors remain constant. That is to say, no other factor can cause a movement along demand curve. Only price can cause a movement along demand curve. A shift in demand can be caused by every other factor apart from price, right? Every other factors like age distribution, seasonal changes, government policies, income of the consumer, price of related commodities, taxation, credit facilities, credit storage facility, and so on and so forth. Transportation. So all this can cause a shift in demand, but price of the commodity do not cause a shift in demand. It only causes a movement along demand curve. Now, what do we understand by a movement along demand curve? A movement along demand curve, a movement along demand curve occurs when there is a change in quantity demanded as a result of a change in price, while other factors remain constant, right? Now, like I said, only price can cause a movement along demand curve. Only price. Importantly, only price can cause a movement along demand curve. Now, what do we understand by this movement along demand curve and why does only price cause a movement along demand curve? Now, we say the movement along demand curve is, it occurs when there's a change in quantity demanded, not a change in demand. Now, a change in quantity demanded can be, imagine I enter the supermarket and I enter the supermarket with 1,000 naira to buy 5 bottles of Coca-Cola drink for 200 naira per bottle. And when I get there, the seller told me that there's an increase in price of Coca-Cola, right? There's an increase in price of Coca-Cola from 200 naira to 300 naira. Automatically, I will not be able to buy the quantity I initially have in mind, the 5 bottles. So because of an increase in price, I'll have to buy less than 5 bottles. So you can see that because of the price of that commodity, the price of that Coca-Cola product or Coca-Cola bottle, now I have to change the quantity of what I want to buy from 5 bottles to 3 or 2 bottles. But when this price falls from 200 naira to maybe 100 naira, now instead of me buying 5 bottles, I can still change the quantity of demand from 5 bottles to 10 bottles because of the because of the decrease in the price of the commodity. So you can see that it is only price that can cause a movement along demand curve. Okay, now there are two types of movement along demand curve, which we're going to discuss on our next slide. Now, one is called one is called an extension of demand, and the other is called the contraction of demand. Like I explained using the Coca-Cola bottle in the supermarket, when prices falls and demand increases, now our demand curve movement is from point A to point B, which which results to movement from which result to a downward sloping movement from point A to point B. Now, I gave you an example that if I go to the supermarket and the price of the Coca-Cola bottle decreases um, from 200 naira to 100 naira, instead of buying 5 bottles, which it was my initial plan, I'm going to now buy 10 bottles. So the quantity is increasing from 5 to 10 because of a fall in price. And when this happens, it is called an extension of demand. Okay, and when there's an extension of demand, there's a movement from point A to point B. In the same demand curve, no other demand curve is created, right? It's in the same demand curve, point A to point B. From our slide, you'll see that because of a decrease in price, now price moved from P1 to P2, point A to point B, right? And quantity moved from Q1 to Q2, which is an increase in quantity and a decrease in price has caused an increase in quantity demanded. Now, secondly, we have what we call the contraction of demand. Same way I explained, when the price of Coca-Cola increases from 200 to 300. Instead of me buying the 5 bottles, I'll have to buy 2 or 3 bottles because of the increase in price. And when there is a price increase, now demand decreases, the quantity of demand decreases, and this will cause an upward movement along demand curve from point B to point A. Okay, from point B to point A, we can say we can see that there is a movement from P3 to P3, right? And there is the quantity changes from Q1 to Q3. So anytime there is price increase, there is always a quantity demand decrease. And when this happens, it is called contraction of demand. Okay? Now, having said this, we'll talk about the shift in demand curve. What do you understand by a shift in demand curve? Now, a shift in demand curve occurs when demand changes due to factors other than price, even when price stays the same, leading to the creation of a new demand curve. Now, the key point here is this result is the formation of a new demand curve. Now, when we talk of a shift in demand can shift either to the right or to the left. Okay? Now, when a shift in demand occurs, a shift to the right, it is an increase in demand. And when it shifts to the left, it is a decrease in demand. Okay? Now, when we say a change or a shift in demand, every other factors can cause a shift in demand apart from price of the commodity. Now, price of related commodity can cause a shift in demand. Take for instance, I enter the supermarket and I want to buy detergent, let's say Viva. And when I get to the market, it happens that Viva, the price of Viva has increased from maybe a sachet of Viva is sold for 3,000 naira and it increased from 3,000 naira to 4,000 naira. Now, because of the increase in the price of Viva from 3 to 4,000 naira, I'll have to now buy a substitute commodity which may be clean, right? Now, because of this price, a substitute commodity will be bought and it will now affect a shift. It will cause a shift in demand curve from the original demand curve to the left, which is a fall in demand for Viva. Okay, because of the price of related commodity, the price of substitute commodity. Another example can be income of the consumer. Higher income results to higher demand, and lower income results to lower demand. Another example for shift that can cause a shift in demand are government policies. Before the COVID-19 virus, the demand for nose masks was not too effective, right? It was very low, very slow. But when the government placed a policy that everybody must put on nose mask because of the virus, you can see in 2020 that the demand for nose masks was very high, right? Now, this is a shift in demand. So always remember that every other factor like age distribution, taxation, credit facilities, storage facilities, transportation, inflation, whatsoever can cause a shift in demand curve, but cannot cause a movement along demand curve. The only thing that can cause a movement along demand curve is price of the commodity. Always remember that there's a difference between price of the commodity and price of related commodity. So the price of the commodity cause a movement along demand curve. Price of related commodity cause a shift in demand curve. Okay? Now, okay, I've explained the causes of a shift in demand curve. We can see them: income of the consumer, taste and fashion, population, price of related commodity, government policies. Okay. Okay. Now, the same way we have two types of movement along the same demand curve. That is the same way we have two types of shift in demand. One, we have increase in demand, and two, we have decrease in demand. Now, decrease in demand at the same price. Demand increases at the same price. Demand curve shifts rightward. So, as prices of goods and services increases, demand curves shift rightward, right? And I told you when we say demand curve shift from the original demand curve to the right, it is an increase in demand. And in the same way, when demand curves shift to the left, it is called a decrease in demand. And this can be caused by other factors affecting demand apart from price of the commodity. Now, key differences between movement along demand curve and shift in demand. For movement along demand curve, we say it is caused by price change, which is price of the commodity alone. A shift in demand is caused by non-price factors, which is to say every other factor apart from price can cause a shift in demand. Number two says same demand curve. Now, a movement along demand curve, the movement slope from point A to point B, or from P1 to P2, and from P2 to P1, right? Or from point B to point A in the same curve. But when we talk about a shift in demand will always formulate or create a new demand curve, because when the original curve is drawn, as demand shifts to the right, a new curve is created to the right, which indicates an increase. And when it shifts to the left, another new curve will be created, which indicates a decrease in demand. So when we're talking about a shift in demand, there's always a new demand curve that is created. Now, lastly, we have change in quantity demanded and change in demand, which I've explained. Change in quantity demanded, movement along demand curve, is mostly caused by price alone, and every other factor can cause a change in demand. Now, extension and contraction of demand. Extension of demand, when price falls, as price falls, demand increases, and for contraction of demand, as price rises, price of the commodity rises, demand decreases. Now, for increase and decrease in demand, under shift in demand curve, as demand moves to the right, a shift rightward, it causes an increase in demand, and when it shifts to the left, it causes a decrease in demand. So thank you so much for watching Deeponomics Academy. You can always follow us on YouTube at Deeponomics Academy. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel, share, and always follow us at Deeponomics Academy for new videos to be posted on topics. In summary, demand, like I said, can change in two main ways. Movement along demand curve, a shift of the demand curve. And remember that a movement along demand curve is caused by changes in price of the commodity per se, and a shift in demand can be caused by non-price factor, which is to say other factors affecting demand apart from price of the commodity. Thank you so much for listening and watching our video. Stay blessed, stay tuned, and we expect to see you next time.